Okay, so we're still in Daniel 12. I'm on the outline, some notes on Daniel 12. We are on verse 3. Before we get into verse 3, let's read the passage on Daniel 12, 1 through 4. We'll read that. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So,
evil shall increase.
You have evil shall increase?
And the New Revised Standard says, many shall be running back and forth, and evil shall increase. And then it has a footnote that says, knowledge. Compare with the Greek or Hebrew is knowledge. Like,
so where do they get the word evil if the Hebrew is knowledge?
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah.
It says, the footnote says, it's spelled out CN, the letter CN, and then compare GK, Greek, colon, Hebrew, knowledge. Well, I don't know what that CN compare Greek means.
Yeah, I don't either. So I'm looking at Bible Gateway just so I can get an idea of what other translations are available. So there are, on Bible Gateway, if you click on the list this in all Bible versions, they have 51 versions in English, and 46 of them say knowledge, and the other 5 say evil. And the ones that say evil, of the 5, 4 of them are New Revised Standard, just various editions of it. And the other one is something I've never heard of, which is not surprising. There's out of 51 translations. The other one is, let's see.
Just come say hi for 5 minutes. You could get back.
New American Bible. New American Bible. Okay, so I've heard of that. The Revised Edition. So, yeah, overwhelmingly, the knowledge is the majority translation there.
I'll be right back. I'm going to go say hi to Roy. He stopped by to pick up something.
Okay. All right. So here you go. See, you're wearing a blue top today, right? Right, Becky? I can't hear you.
Green.
Green. Oh, green.
Yeah. I almost fade into the background that I have hanging behind me.
Yeah.
So when I saw it in my closet this morning, I went, oh, it's just the perfect day to wear that.
It is. It is.
So tell me, is it only showing your chat?
All right. So I think really knowledge is what's going on there. I'm not sure about the evil translation. So that was in verse 4. So we're looking today at verse 3. We've been looking at verse 2, and I want to see if anybody, since we looked at verse 2 about many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. We talked about the difficulty with it saying many. We talked about, spent a lot of time, I think, on seeing what it means that that resurrection language is being used of people who are raised to contempt. And on Tuesday, we looked at several passages that indicate that within the Christian congregation, there are people who profess to be Christians who aren't, And that's why there's so many warning passages in the New Testament. In the same ways Christians are described, actual believers are described. And in fact, the word believer is used of these people. But the same descriptions of what we would say is a true believer of Christ is used in a lot of cases for people who are not true believers, who are either self-deceived and think they're believers, or who are hypocritical in their belief. And the warning passages serve to wake us and them, out of our sleep so that we can, repent and seek and look into our hearts and test ourselves and see if we're in the faith. But we looked at those passages and talked about that phenomenon within the church. And I said it seemed to me that the language of the New Testament can be described in this language that is used in the book of Daniel about hypocrites or non-Christians within the Christian congregation. And now that it's been a couple days since we had that lesson, I wanted to see if anybody had any feedback about that.
I am still not at all sure about what I think those verses refer to. And I don't think that, a whole nother lesson on it will help me.
Right. Yeah. I am the same way with these particular verses. This is a very difficult passage. I think my inability to see any reason to jump forward thousands of years is what outweighs the difficulties I have with not jumping forward 2,000 years. But that it is all still very tentative for me. And when I looked at, when we went through it on Tuesday, and I was looking at the passages in the New Testament and thinking about it, I thought, yeah, this fits really well. And then this morning, not now having a couple of days between being exposed to the passages and looking at it again, just looking at Daniel, I go, I don't know. So
Or not.
Is that pretty much everybody's experience?
We talking about verse 2?
Yeah. It's either that or something else, right, Don?
Yeah.
So I watched what I missed on Tuesday, and I came away feeling pretty comfortable with I'm not ready, or I'm not supposed to understand this yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a bone that I should be chewing on.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with chewing on that bone for a while.
Yeah. So
I'm going to bury it. I'll dig it up some other time.
Well, that also
dig it back
works.
up when it's nice and ripe.
Yeah. So I'm not 100%, convinced, as none of us are. But as I've said several times, when you get to passages that are highly difficult, like this one, or explanations that are difficult, none of the explanations seem to fit on the surface. And so I think, at least my procedure usually is to say, which of these explanations has the least critical problems? Yeah, and if any of them have a critical, serious problem, you can just reject that one. But then you're left with maybe one or two that, if you're left with one, then lucky you, know which one's right. But if you're left with one or two, then you have to choose between them and say, there's a problem any way I look at this, which is the least serious problem. And for my understanding, I might not have explained exactly perfectly what the passage means, but I think along the lines of a first century fulfillment, for me, presents way less problems than the alternative. So
Yeah, we have to look at what is this time of anguish, such as has never occurred since the nations first came into existence? What is that time of anguish? And what has led up to this time of anguish?
Right. Do you have an answer for that?
Well, yeah, the second part, what has led to the time of anguish is continual disobedience and sin in the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of those, or all of those people will face shame and everlasting contempt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I think that it's, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm kind of like at an 8 for this time of trouble being the fall of Jerusalem and the events leading up to it. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the more certain aspects of the interpretation.
Yeah. And again, the reasons for that
Yeah, right. The reason, right, is
wasn't just woe is me, the people, these poor innocent people are being oppressed. Not like that.
not like that. No, they have the whole Old Testament witness telling him every step along the way that they need to repent and receive God's messengers and get ready for the coming of the Christ and all of that. And yeah, so it seems that there are some parts of this passage which are easier to say, I understand this than others. And verse 2, as I said before, is the most difficult. But so we're going to stop talking about verse 2, except, not as the main focus. We'll refer to it from time to time, but let's look at verse 3. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Now we've seen this phrase, those who are wise, and before in Daniel, in this very prophecy. If you go back to chapter 11, verse 33, this is this section of Daniel 11, everybody agrees, is during the terror that Antiochus Epiphanes brought in Jerusalem, including the time when he's trying to eliminate Judaism. He's burning the sacred scrolls. He's profaning the temple, sacrifices a pig on the altar, all kinds of things. And you can see that in verse 31, you can see some of that. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. So we have two types of people here who are responding to Antiochus. Jews who have apostatized, he wins them over by flattery. And the Jews that have not apostatized and are faithful to their God, that's what they're called here, people who know their God and stand firm and take action. That's who's being talked about in verse 33. The wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help. So the wise among the people shall make many understand. The people being spoken of here are those who have not apostatized, and among that group of people, there are wise people who are making them understand. These are teachers. These are the priests. This is the family of the Maccabees, who is a priestly family, who are instructing the people in the word of the Lord and how to obey him during that difficult time. Excuse me. So they're the ones who are wise and who are making many understand. When we get to chapter 12, then that phrase again is being used, verse 3, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So these wise here that are being spoken of in Daniel 12:3 are not, they're not the same people, but they're the same type of people. They are going to be people who are teaching the rest of the people, the faithful, how to be faithful and what the word of the Lord is. In the first century context, this would have been the Christian missionaries who went out, who were spreading the gospel and teaching. Says, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Let's also look at Malachi 2:6. That's not on the outline, but it's a passage that is relevant. Malachi 2:6. So this is talking about, I'll go ahead and read it, and then I'll give a little bit of context. True instruction was in his mouth, and no wrong was found on his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many from iniquity. This is speaking about Levi, and we'll give the background in a second, but the relationship between this passage in Malachi and the Daniel 12 passage is that in Daniel 12, the people who are wise and shining like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness. These are the people who turn many to righteousness. And in here, Levi is being spoken of as walking with peace and uprightness and turning many from iniquity. So there's a kind of a resonance there between the two passages. And it's the idea of somebody with the word of God is teaching and acting, teaching the rest of God's people to act and live according to the word of God, and that person himself is also acting according to the word of God. So Levi, being a priest, is the same kind of context as we saw with the Maccabees, who were also priests and were teaching and leading the people. So in a New Testament context, again, in a first century context, the priests and the kings are the Christian people, and particularly the people who bring the gospel and who bring instruction in how to live in the gospel. Yeah, I want to look at a couple of other verses here. So one of the things about, never mind. I was going to go back and look at all of the passages about Levi and Phineas that might be relevant, but I think you get the point here. Phineas was Levi's grandson, who this passage actually is really about, even though he's called a covenant with Levi later in the passage. So just to make the connection there, just the thought of Daniel 12, verse 3, being about people who instruct God's people in the way to live God's word. Then let's go back to Daniel 12:3. We'll look at a couple of other passages in relation to this. So again, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So we're going to talk about shining like the brightness of the sky above, or like stars forever and ever. So we have maybe Philippians 2:15 might have something about that.
Indeed, it does.
Does look like it. Starting in 14, do all things without grumbling or questioning, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. So lights in the world here, Christians are holding out the word of life. It is there like lights. Similar.
And even more close in the NIV, it's in which you shine like stars in the universe.
Yeah, that's almost identical, right? Yeah, so I had seen that passage, and in fact, I wonder, because that's how I remembered it, right? Who has an NIV? Does the NIV say that? What does it say?
It says, then you will shine among them like stars in the sky.
The NIV says that. Yeah,
No, the NIV, well, my NIV,
Yeah, I have the 2011 version.
oh, I have an older one.
Yeah.
okay, so the NIV sounds very, very close. It's obviously a verbal link there to this passage. And what's Paul talking about in Philippians? He's talking about the Christian congregation in the first century, right? So we have a couple of links then to the first century, just in the language, the way it's being used, and talking about gospel proclamation and Christian teaching and bringing people back from error and pointing them in the way of truth. So it's also interesting, and I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but I just want to point out that there's a couple of references to creation in the Daniel 12 passage, right? We already had awake from the dust of the earth. Now, dust of the earth, how is that related to creation? That's the creation of mankind,
Adam.
right? Adam, creation of Adam from the dust of the earth. So we have creation language being used, and also a verse, the verse we just read about shining like stars in the sky or in the expanse is how it is. This is the word that comes out of Genesis 1, where God creates the stars and puts them in the expanse, and they shine brightly to rule over the day, to be rulers, times and seasons. And so we have this creation, recreation type of language going on. Obviously, the resurrection type language is also recreation type language. And so Daniel 12 is speaking of a time of new creation. And this would be easy to draw analogies with the coming of Christ in the first century. He comes and brings with him creation life and gives life to his people and actually raises the dead, some of them. So in Matthew 5:14, we know that you are the light of the world. In Ephesians 5:8 is similar to that. Ephesians 5:8 says, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light. So, the idea of Christians being light is not, it's not unfamiliar. So verse 3 seems to be easy to reconcile with the first century context of preaching the gospel. And we get to verse 4, you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. We talked about how that compares with the shutting up the book because the things are in the far future for Daniel. That's stated in another passage that's in, let's just look at it again, 8:26, Daniel 8:26. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And the many days from now would be the time of the end, which is being spoken of in Daniel 12. So Daniel 12:4, seal it up. It's not for you, it's for some time in the future. We contrasted that with Revelation 20:10, where John is told to not seal up the book because the time is near. You would think whatever time that Daniel is talking about is the time that is being spoken of in Revelation 22:10, when it says that time is near. Yeah, that time is near. So So let's go to the second page on the outline, unless you have any questions or comments or want to look at the Revelation passage again. Yes, Mom.
Comment?
Yeah.
When you read the whole, from Daniel 12:1 through 4,
Mhm.
then what we talked about on Tuesday makes sense when you consider the whole picture,
Mm.
because it makes sense to me that Daniel 1 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got verse 2. Then you've got verse 3, which is about preaching the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
and verse 4, close it up until the time of the end. I think that the end they're talking about is the end of the old order.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the multitudes awakening is the time of Jesus, or in the time when the gospel was being preached. And it could either mean that people actually rose from the dead, which they did when Jesus was crucified, or it could
Mhm.
mean that they were spiritually dead.
Mm-hmm.
But that there's no reason to think that verse 2 is a different time period than verse 1 and 3.
Right. Yeah, that's a good observation. And yeah, to just, you would have to wrench it right out of the context and put it somewhere else. And generally what happens is when verse 2 gets taken out like that, the other verses surrounding it also get pulled into that future context. So, but there are, dispensationalists are very well known for inserting or seeing, maybe inserting is the wrong word, believing that there are large gaps of time in various places in the scriptures. And so the natural way that they read the Bible is to read it, and I understand it in its context, and then I get to something that has eschatological language that I don't understand. In this context, there must be a gap of thousands of years. And they do that with years, and they do that with all kinds of things. Like I was reading the other day a comment of on a verse that said that on that day the righteous and the wicked will be raised. But the dispensationalist author was trying to argue that the day being spoken of included the resurrection of saints at the rapture on the dispensational timeline, saints at the rapture, and the Old Testament saints at the rapture. And of course, there are no wicked people raised then. The wicked people are raised at the end of the millennium. So it's 1,007 years later. And so he said that day is, this 1,007 years. Like, really? How is that in any way literal?
Well, it seems like the temptation for the dispensationalists, and I'm not saying that, absolutely that they're wrong, but it seems to me from my point of view
Mm-hmm.
that the temptation is that when they come to a passage like this, that they don't understand, they don't see it as having already happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't understand it, they say, well, that's at the end of time. That's it. That's in our future.
Right.
Because we haven't seen that.
Right. And, I think we all tend to do that type of thing. Things that we don't understand, we move somewhere else. And the tendency, though, to do that among dispensationalists, and maybe even among us, comes from misidentifying, I think, the proper genre that you're reading. Dispensationalists, because one of their basic principles is literal, you must interpret the Bible literally. And when they say literally, they are contrasting that with what they call spiritually, not figurative, but spiritual. But in general, so this is how they come up with the idea that promises to Israel, national Israel in the Old Testament, have to be fulfilled to national Israel in the New Testament, or at least in the coming ages. Things like that. So because they have a presumption of literalness, when they come to passages like we talked about in the Revelation or in Matthew 24, where it says things like the stars are going to fall from the sky and things like that, they do say, and then they write this in their commentaries, and this is pretty standard, they do say, that hasn't happened. And because that hasn't happened, we know it's going to happen in the future.
Mm.
And you go, well, that
Because
hasn't
it's
happened.
literal.
Because it's literal. Right. And they push the literal interpretation pretty far. I was reading a commentator, Tommy Ice, who's well respected within the dispensational community, and he was criticizing another millennial or post-millennial commentator they were talking about the millennium, and Tommy Ice said that the problem with the person who came up with a non-dispensational interpretation of Revelation 20, which talks about the 1,000 years, is that they should be reading Revelation 20 the exact same way they read Genesis 1, but they're not reading it that way. And that's why they don't come up with a literal 1,000 years. It's like, well, Genesis 1 is historical narrative. He said that Revelation 20 was prose nonfiction. Like, well, yeah, but that's a really broad category. That's not, is it apocalyptic? Is it prophecy? Is it poetry? It's much more closer to those things than it is to how Genesis 1 is written, although there are probably some figurative elements there's definitely literary elements in Genesis 1, and there may be some figurative elements in Genesis 1, but they're very, very few, if any. So the main problem there then is the presumption of literalness. And they say, well, this hasn't happened, and so it must happen. And well, that's why they still argue that despite the fact the Bible says that the Israelites have received all of the land that God had promised to them, they say they haven't, because God said they would have it forever. And well, so yeah, our assumptions play a big role in how we interpret the text. Me too, my own assumptions too. So, but good point. I think, yeah.
They see Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is sort of a parenthetical verse.
Well, they use it to support a couple of their various resurrections. And when they read Daniel 12, they are.
But it jumps into the future.
Yeah, it jumps
and
into
then
the
comes
future.
back to the present in verse 3.
No, that's not the way they would read it. Actually, they jump to the future in chapter 11, verse 36. It goes to the time of the final Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just stay there. Yeah, which is way better, I think, than jumping back and forth. At least it shows a little bit of consistency. But it's the jump, that is suspect. It's the initial jump into the future. That's the thing that has to be examined. And if there's no reason to do it textually, then I think you have to come up with, I'm not understanding this passage because, I can't see how it can be this first century thing on a dispensationalist view. If you're a dispensationalist, what you should be doing is going, I can't see how this fits. So that means I misunderstand it, not that I have to put in 1,000 or 2,000 years here. But yeah, so good point, Mom, about the context. I think if you get to verse 1 and you are able to understand it in a first century context, all the way up to there, no reason to jump forward, especially if verse 3 is in a first century context. So, yeah, good point. So the next part in Daniel, I wanted to just comment on many shall run to and fro and knowledge shall increase. That's the second half or the back side of the handout. And I just wrote down this note for myself, but I'll just read it for you. The message is sealed to Daniel, but as time goes on, the people of God will be able to see the progressive fulfillment of the things predicted, and they will know in increasing measure the faithfulness of God to bring about his infallible word. I think that's what's being said there. I don't think Daniel is being told about cell phones and airplanes. I think he's being told about that Daniel, it's sealed to you. And many will go to and fro, either the armies crossing the Holy Land or people seeking to understand Daniel's vision. And as time goes on, knowledge will increase because the events themselves will have been started to take place. So I don't think it's, again, no need to push it into the future. Yeah, Mom.
So in the NIV, it says many will go here and there to increase knowledge, which is a different meaning.
Yeah, different meaning. Let's see here. Let me see. I'm just on Bible Gateway, checking this out. Let me see all English translations. So King James 2021 version, many shall run to and fro and knowledge shall be increased. American Standard Version, this is 1901, many shall run to and fro and knowledge shall be increased. Amplified Version, many will go back and forth and search anxiously and knowledge will increase. They have brackets in there. Let's see, Christian Standard Bible, many will roam about and knowledge will increase. Christian English Bible, many will stray far, but knowledge will increase. CEV, Christian English Version, many people will go everywhere searching for the knowledge to be found in it. The scroll, referring back to the scroll. ESV, I read that. Good News Version, let's see. Many shall run to and fro and knowledge shall be increased. That's pretty standard. I wonder why the NIV does that. That's an interpretive. I mean, all translation involves interpretation, so they've put in what they thought there, which is another reason why it's always good to read more than one translation. So interesting.
And I also don't understand the significance of people running to and fro.
Yeah, so that's been explained a couple of ways. I don't understand the significance of it either, but the meaning may be referring to the many people who have been described in the prophecy that are going back and forth across the land of Israel in the battles that have been described. That's one way people have interpreted. I think it has to do with actually trying to understand the contents of the vision. And so I think it has the connotation, the idea of many will search here and there to try and understand what the scroll is about, but that knowledge will increase and then I'm adding as time goes on in my thought there. So again, the two ways are this refers going back and forth of armies or going back and forth in a figurative way of people searching for understanding.
Yeah, they're not running amok.
Probably not.
They're not running amok. They're searching, and who knows? They might be searching for the Dead Sea Scrolls for all we know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, right. So I'm not really clear on what exactly that is. I think I lean toward the second version, second view I gave. But, and I think I lean towards that because it fits with what I think the passage says overall. So, yeah,
Makes sense. In
All
other words,
right, we're on the same page.
yeah, yeah. So the next thing I want to look at is going to be in verse 7. So we'll read 5 through 7. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others stood, one on this bank of the stream and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever and ever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. So I want to look at that word shattering in verse 7, the shattering of the power of the holy people. Who has a different word? Anybody have a different word? What do you got, Becky?
Broken.
Broken. Shattering of the break. Oh, that when the power of the holy people becomes broken, something like that. Okay.
When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed.
Okay. Broken, shattering. Anybody have anything else? Okay. So I have the Strong's definition there. Shattering meaning break in pieces, scatter, break, dash, discharge, dispersed, overspread, dash in pieces, sunder. This is an interesting verse, an interesting word, because it has not only the idea of breaking, right, which is to shatter or to make broken, but also the idea of dispersal and scattering. And so the same word is used for both of these concepts. And that's a really interesting thing, because it turns out that what happens at the fall of Jerusalem is the power of the people is broken and the people are scattered. So their power is shattered and they're scattered at the fall of Jerusalem. Let's look at Psalm 2:9. We've looked at this before. Psalm 2:9 about the use of this word.
says, you will break them with an iron scepter. You will shatter them like pottery.
Yeah, so this is the shatter them, the breaking. It's the same word here being used, and it is the people that are being shattered and dashed in pieces in the ESV, breaking them with a rod of iron, dashing them in pieces like a potter's vessel. This is the image that the word evokes, right? This violent breaking. The context in Psalm 2 is that these are the nations that have been rebellious against the Lord, the people who have been rebellious against the Lord. So, judgment context. Luke 21:24 uses the Greek equivalent of this word.
A little different context.
Yeah, a little different context. They will fall by the edge of the sword, be led captive among all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This is talking about the scattering of the people and the subjugation of the people. And then Deuteronomy 28.
But this, from Daniel, he says, so that when the shattering of the power of the people comes to an end. So he's talking about when this ends, the shattering, when it ends,
Mm-hmm.
then all these things would be finished.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying at the end of this shattering.
Right, at the end of so Daniel asks, how long until all of the things you've told me about take place? And the answer is a time times and half a time, which is equivalent to when the end of all of the things that I've told you takes place, that's the end. And how to summarize that is that this has been about the shattering, the breaking of the power of the holy people. This is why it's all about trials and difficulties and armies marching across the land and things like that. And then the time of trouble, such as had never been before and never would be again. So at the end of that time of trouble, I think, is when the shattering of the people ends.
Right.
Right. So let's look at one last reference, Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28, covenant curses.
Which verse?
We'll start in verse, we have 7 minutes. I think we'll start in verse 49 because we've got 7 minutes. We're going to eventually look at, we're going to get to verse 68, but we're going to look at verse 64. That's the main verse. Verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away. So the Lord is speaking to Israel. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. It shall eat the offspring of your cattle and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed. It also shall not leave you grain, wine, or oil, the increase of your herds or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to the wife he embraces, and to the last of the children whom he has left, so that he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing left in the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in all your towns. The most tender and refined woman among you who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground because she is so delicate and tender, will begrudge to the husband she embraces, to her son and to her daughter, her afterbirth that comes out from between her feet, and her children whom she bears, because lacking everything she will eat them secretly in the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in all your towns. If you are not careful to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring on you and your offspring extraordinary afflictions severe and lasting, and sicknesses grievous and lasting. And he will bring upon you again all the diseases of Egypt, of which you were afraid, and they shall cling to you. Every sickness also and every affliction that is not recorded in the book of this law, the Lord will bring upon you until you are destroyed. Whereas you were as numerous as the stars of heaven, you shall be left few in number, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God. And as the Lord took delight in doing good and multiplying you, so the Lord will take delight in bringing ruin upon you and destroying you, and you shall be plucked off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. And the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. And among these nations you shall find no respite, and there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart and failing eyes and a languishing soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day you shall be in dread and have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, if only it were evening. And at the evening you shall say, if only it were morning, because of the dread that your heart shall feel, and the sights that your eyes shall see. And the Lord will bring you back in ships to Egypt, a journey that I promised that you should never make again. And there you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but there will be no buyer. That last line is so pitiful. There will be no buyer. So verse 64 talks about in relation to all these things, the judgment of God, the great time of judgment that comes upon the people, that there would be scattered among all the peoples. And certainly Deuteronomy 28, the covenant curses coming upon the people, totally could be described as the breaking of the power of the holy people. This is what is happening. They are being reduced down to such a pitiful state that they can't even sell themselves as slaves. Well,
Does history tell us that that actually happened after the siege of Jerusalem, that they went to Egypt in ships and tried to sell themselves?
I don't have any knowledge of that. I haven't heard about that. But everything else I can verify has happened.
Everything else happened.
Everything else happened. So, and that may have happened in a way that is maybe didn't look like the way that I'm picturing it when I read the passage. I don't know. But as far as the scattering or the shattering of the people leading to their scattering, these are passages. I mean, I think what's happening, in verse 7 of Daniel 12, talking about the end of this is when the shattering of the holy people has been accomplished. I think that coincides with the scattering of them among all the nations. The covenant curses coming upon them to the full, where they even cannibalized, which took place during the siege of Jerusalem, and where the armies from the north come against them, which happened, where all the things just talked about, the towns are flattened and the crops are taken by the aggressor, and all of this stuff takes place when the siege of Jerusalem and the fall of Jerusalem, and then the people are scattered among the nations once again. So it's very easy for me in many of the verses of Daniel 12 to see the first century context ending with the fall of Jerusalem. And so in that context, then I approach the more difficult passages and see if they fit. And even though Daniel 12:2 looks really difficult and looks to be talking about a physical resurrection, it doesn't fit with any physical resurrection. And so we have to go with a spiritual resurrection. And if we stick with the first century context, then we have it in relationship to preaching of the gospel and people waking up, awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, type of thing. And some of those people received the word of the Lord and held on to it and persevered for eternal life. And some of those people believed the word of the Lord and to their shame renounced it later because of fear or desire for wealth, as Jesus says in his parable. So I think that fits. And I won't hold to that interpretation dogmatically and insist upon it, but I can't think of a good reason to skip ahead thousands of years. So that's where we are. So we finished, I think, Daniel 12. And we didn't read the last couple of verses, but we can do that. We can read the last couple of verses, and then we will say we can move on back to the Revelation. So verse 8, Daniel 12, verse 8. I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? He said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. So we've already talked about these groups of people. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place. at the end of the days. So those numbers, nobody knows exactly. There's not a good explanation for those numbers. We have things that are approximate. The other things in the passage are earlier than those numbers. I think we understand, right? We've talked about those. Verse 8, shut up the book. Many, verse 10, many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and refined. These are the people who come to faith. These are the people who follow the Lord. But the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. We got this. But those who are wise shall understand. Okay, this all makes sense in a first century context. So we're left with some difficult passages that I'm not capable of understanding at this point and explaining at this point. But I think we, at least for me, I think Daniel 12. I think that Daniel 10, the prophecy of Daniel 10 through 12 is just one continuous narrative all the way up from the Persian period all the way up through the fall of Jerusalem. And that it gets us into the gospel era and the preaching of the gospel and the conversions that follow, and the end of the old age. Just like I think all of the prophecies of Daniel, that none of them actually go beyond that. So then that puts us right back in the context for Revelation 10, which is where we started from several weeks ago. So long circuitous path. Any final questions or comments? Okay. Well, I've enjoyed going through Daniel 12. No, actually 10 through 12. I've enjoyed it. I really enjoy going through challenging passages because you get to think about what's the best way to interpret this and approach it, and what are the strengths and the weaknesses of the various options, and because every time you agree to an interpretation, you're buying you're buying a package, right? You get a whole package. And so
If you're consistent.
Yeah, if you're consistent. So there's some things in the other package that I just don't want to own, so I don't buy that passage. And despite the fact that in some cases it looks great, like it fits. So does that make sense? Yeah.
Makes as much sense as any other explanation I've heard.
Yep. Well, I don't know if that's good or bad. All right.